was convicted on 3 counts of capital murder along with ex-NOPD officer Antoinette Frey. Triple murder case that has gripped the New Orleans Police Department and this community for the last 24 years. The duo both sentenced to die for killing 2 members of the family.
The entire north side of town is searched. Police later arrest 2 women, but the man armed and extremely dangerous is nowhere to be seen.
This is the story of George Stinney. He was just 14 years old when he was taken by the authorities and charged with a crime. But they didn't just convict him, they executed him. And just yesterday, he was exonerated. Finally, the state of South Carolina said he didn't do it.
For thy goodness sake, O Lord. This will only last a moment. O my God, do I trust in thee. Let me not be ashamed. Let not mine enemies triumph over me. When you land, you be ahead and think about it like you're leaping over a wide ditch.
Antoinette Frank was a 23-year-old rookie New Orleans police officer when she and Rogers Lacaze terrorized the family-owned Kim Ann restaurant, shooting and taking the lives of Officer Ronald Williams and siblings Ha and Chong Vu during a 1995 robbery. Frank currently resides at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women in St. Gabriel, Louisiana, one of the only 2 women on the state's condemned row. This is her story. Unstable childhood. Frank had an unstable childhood, but there was one thing that was clear to her since she was a small girl: she wanted to become a policewoman. As a teenager and later on young adult, Frank suffered from being a member of a broken family. Her brother was a law fugitive, her father would appear in her life only occasionally, and Frank became distressed about these issues, needing psychiatric help. According to Chuck Hustmeyer, a former policeman himself, when Frank applied to become a cop in Louisiana, she lied about her psychological and psychiatric condition in order to be hired as a policewoman. Frank applied with the NOPD in 1993. Several red flags turned up during the hiring process. She'd been caught lying on several sections of her application and had flunked 2 standard psychiatric evaluations. Psychiatrist Philip Scuria examined her and advised in no uncertain terms that she not be hired, saying she was shallow and superficial. When it looked like her application was stalling despite protesting Scuria's evaluation, she left a goodbye note that made it sound like she would take her life and disappeared for over a day. Despite this, the NOPD was chronically short-handed and desperate to get more people on the force. Even with this shortage, the department did not hire anyone who doesn't live in New Orleans. Accordingly, she was hired on February 7, 1993. She graduated from the police academy on February 28, 1993. Frank's service. Frank served in the New Orleans police for less than 1 year and was hired despite being caught lying on several sections of her application. During a shooting, she met her future boyfriend, an alleged drug dealer named Rogers Lacaze, who had been badly injured during the shooting and who required help from Frank that night, as well as hospitalization. Frank and Lacaze fell in love quickly. The couple shared a passionate relationship. Perhaps feeling that Lacaze brought her the solace she needed in life, Frank became so infatuated with the young man, who was 18 at the time, that she even let him drive her police car around. Though she kept their relationship private, other police officers witnessed Lacaze driving her car and even observed him moving her police unit at the scene of an accident she was investigating. On one occasion, Lacaze accompanied her on a complaint call and she introduced him as a trainee. There were other times when Lacaze was introduced as her nephew. On March 4, 1995, Frank and Lacaze visited Kim An, a Vietnamese restaurant in East New Orleans. As the restaurant was closing early that morning, Chow Vu, sister of 2 of the victims, went into the kitchen to count money. She re-entered the dining room of the restaurant to pay Officer Ronald Williams when she noticed Frank approaching the restaurant yet again. Sensing something was wrong, Chow Vu ran back to the kitchen and hid the money in the microwave before returning to the front of the restaurant. Using a stolen key, Frank and Lacaze entered the restaurant and began to walk quickly to the back of the building, pushing Chow, one of Chow's brothers, Coke, and a restaurant employee along with her. Shots rang out and Frank ran back to the front of the restaurant. Chow, Coke, and the employee hid in a cooler in the kitchen, concerned because they did not know the whereabouts of Chow's and Coke's sister and brother, Ha and Kong. From inside the cooler, Chow and Coke could partially see the front of the restaurant. Chow initially could see Frank, who appeared to be looking for something. Frank moved out of Chow's line of vision, and then the 3 hiding heard additional gunshots. Koch next observed Frank searching in the area where the VU usually kept their money. He then saw her walk over to the area where he later found the bodies of his brother and sister, and he heard more gunshots. The chaos. Frank and Lacaze were shouting and demanding the money. Ha and Kong did not know where Chow had hidden the money. 21-year-old Ha was shot 3 times as she knelt pleading for her life, and 17-year-old Kong was shot 6 times and pistol-whipped. After Frank and Lacaze left the premises, Koch emerged from the cooler and ran out the back door of the restaurant to a nearby friend's house to call 911 to report. Chow tried frantically to call 911 on her cell phone, but being inside the cooler, she could not receive a signal. Frank dropped off Lacaze at a nearby apartment complex, both knowing that there were witnesses left behind. Antoinette Frank had obtained an off-duty job as a security guard at the restaurant along with Officer Williams, who considered her to be a friend. Frank heard the 911 call on her portable police radio, saying that an officer was down at the Kim On restaurant. She returned to the scene, parked in the rear, and entered through the back door of the restaurant. She made her way through the kitchen to the dining room, where Chow waited for help at the front door. As Chow bolted through the restaurant's front door to the safety of arriving officers, Frank immediately identified herself as a police officer. Chow told Frank that she knew what she had done and cried to the officers that Frank had committed the crimes. The questioning. Chow and Frank were questioned in detail while seated at different tables in the restaurant. Frank was taken to police headquarters for additional questioning, where she later confessed to the crimes along with Lacaze. The defendant and Rogers Lacaze were arrested and charged with first-degree offense. Frank's father had stayed at her home not too long before the robbery, then he disappeared. The fact that the police found a human skull with a bullet hole in his head buried under Frank's house not long after her father's disappearance also helped her become a prime suspect of the restaurant slayings. Frank and Rogers Lacaze were indicted by a New Orleans parish grand jury on April 28, 1995. Their trials were severed, and Rogers Lacaze was tried first on July 17 to 21, 1995, found guilty as charged, and served capital punishment. The trial. Frank's trial began on September 5, 1995, and on September 12, the evidence against her was so overwhelming that Frank's attorneys did not mount a defense despite subpoenaing 40 witnesses. The jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts and recommended capital punishment to all counts. The defendant was formally given capital punishment on October 20, 1995, and sent to condemned row at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women in St. Gabriel, Louisiana, very near Baton Rouge. On October 18, 2006, Frank's attorneys argued before the Louisiana Supreme Court that her sentence should be overturned because she was denied state-funded experts to help prepare for the sentencing phase of the trial. On May 22, 2007, the Louisiana Supreme Court ruled 5-2 that capital punishment should be upheld. On April 22, 2008, State Judge Frank Marullo signed the warrant for Antoinette Frank. According to the warrant, Frank was scheduled for execution by lethal injection on July 15, 2008. In May, however, the Louisiana Supreme Court issued a 90-day stay of execution effective June 10, pending ongoing appeals. On September 11, 2008, the day that the state Supreme Court stay was to end, a new warrant was signed by the same judge. According to this second warrant, Frank was scheduled for execution by lethal injection on December 8, 2008. In a new round of appeals, defense attorneys argued that they had had too little time to review the voluminous record before the deadline for filing appeals. The Louisiana State Supreme Court ruled on the case again. Their decision, made public November 25, 2008, effectively canceled the warrant signed by Judge Marullo in September. Bias in question. In September 2009, Frank moved to have Judge Marullo removed from her ongoing post-conviction appeals on grounds of bias, given that he had already signed 2 warrants for her. Louisiana State Judge Lori White heard the motion on September 2009 and on January 3, 2010, ruled that Marullo should not be taken off the case. Her attorney stated she would appeal the ruling to the state Supreme Court, which had already overruled both of Marullo's warrants. However, yet another lower court state judge ruled in October 2010 that Marullo had to be recused from the Frank and Lacaze cases because it was unclear if he had been open with the defense teams about his own surprising connection to the gun used in the restaurant slayings. If Frank were to be executed, she would be the first woman to be done so in the state since 1942. On 23 May 2007, Antoinette Frank was properly sentenced to be executed by lethal injection at her trial. Frank, 36, is one of 2 women on Louisiana's condemned row at the women's prison in St. Gabriel. Emotions remain raw across New Orleans when it comes to the case of Antoinette Frank. The high-profile case riveted the public as details emerged, such as the fact that Frank had scored poorly on an NOPD psychological exam yet still earned a uniform, badge, and gun. In 1944, George Stinney lived in Alcolu, South Carolina, with his father, George Stinney Sr., mother Amy, and his 4 siblings. Stinney's father worked at the town sawmill, and the family resided in company housing. His father was not only poor, but also African American in 1940s segregated America. This is his story.
They couldn't strap him in right. They took the Bible he was carrying and made him use it as a booster seat. They told the family, if you don't leave town immediately, we're going to lynch you all.
Slaying in a small town. On March 23, 1944, the bodies of Betty June Binnicker and Mary Emma Thames were found in a ditch on the African American side of Alcolu after the girls failed to return home the night before. The girls were last seen riding their bicycles looking for flowers. As they had passed the Stinney's property, they had asked Stinney and his sister Amy about where they could find the flowers of their choice. The two had been together at the time of the slayings, but that little piece of information was completely overlooked by the police in its bid to pin the blame on someone. George and his older brother John were arrested on suspicion. John was released by police, but George was held in custody. He was not allowed to see his parents until after his trial and conviction. Following Stinney's arrest, his father was fired from his job at the local sawmill, and the Stinney family had to immediately vacate their company housing. The family feared for their safety. Stinney's parents did not see him again before the trial. He had no support during his 81-day confinement and trial. He was detained at a jail in Columbia, 50 miles from Alcolu, due to the risk of lynching. Stinney was questioned alone without his parents or an attorney present. Seems impossible in present-day America, right? In those days, it was entirely too possible. America has come a long way since those dark days, but it has yet to emerge fully from its disturbing past.
Ruth's sister, Violet Freeman, went home with me from school. So we went down to the church to get some water to take back to the house. This black boy came down there pushing a tricycle. He said, well, if you don't get away from here and if you come back, I will kill you. I said, we came to get some water and we just got to playing down here. That was the evening before the girl and Tim's girl went missing the next day.
A miscarriage of justice. The entire proceedings against Stinney, including jury selection, took place on April 24, 1944. Stinney's court-appointed counsel was Charles Ploden, a tax commissioner campaigning for election to local office. Ploden did not challenge the 3 police officers who testified that Stinney confessed to the 2 murders, even though there was no signed confession. He also did not challenge the prosecution at any turn. Stinney's counsel did not call any witnesses, did not cross-examine witnesses, and offered little or no defense. Between the time of Stinney's arrest and his execution, his parents were allowed to see him once after the trial, when he was held in the Columbia Penitentiary. Under the threat of lynching, they were not allowed to see him any other time. Stinney was executed on June 16, 1944 at 7:30 a.m. He was prepared for execution by electric chair and buried in an unmarked grave in Crowley.
And we knew those girls. We went to school together because of the way he threatened us and the way he looked at us. Just that they were very sweet girls. I can't say that he killed them, but I firmly believe that he did, because Mama could stand in the back door of our house and see us down there at the church. And she started down there to the church because she saw those little girls down there. So she turned around and went back to the house after she knew that he had threatened us. But somebody came up in the yard that she didn't go on down there because she said maybe she could have kept those little girls from going.
Too little, too late. In 2004, George Frierson, a local historian who grew up in Alcolu, started researching the case after reading a newspaper article about it. His work gained the attention of South Carolina lawyers Steve McKenzie and Matt Burgess. In addition, Ray Brown, attorney James Moon, and others contributed countless hours of research and review of historical documents, and found witnesses and evidence to assist in exonerating Stinney. McKenzie and Burgess, along with attorney Ray Chandler representing Stinney's family, filed a motion for a new trial on October 25, 2013. New evidence in the court hearing in January 2014 included testimony by Stinney's siblings that he was with them at the time of the slayings. In addition, an affidavit was introduced from the Reverend Francis Batson, who found the girls and pulled them from the water-filled ditch. In his statement, he recalls there was not much blood in or around the ditch, suggesting that they may have been slayed elsewhere and moved. Wilford Johnny Hunter, who was in prison with Stinney, testified that the teenager told him he had been made to confess. Rather than approving a new trial, on December 16, 2014, Circuit Court Judge Carmen Mullen vacated Stinney's conviction. She ruled that he had not received a fair trial, as he was not effectively defended and his Sixth Amendment rights had been violated. The ruling was a rare use of the legal remedy of coram nobis. Judge Mullen ruled that his confession was likely coerced and thus inadmissible. She also found that the execution of a 14-year-old constituted cruel and unusual punishment, and that his attorney failed to call exculpating witnesses or to preserve his right of appeal. Mullen confined her judgment to the process of the prosecution, noting that Stinney may well have committed this crime. So many legal procedures and fail-safes had been overlooked in the proceedings, as well as the trial, that a severe miscarriage of justice was inevitable, and George had paid for it with his life.
And they're hoping that a South Carolina judge will soon issue a symbolic verdict. Even though George Stinney's trial was 70 years ago, legal advocates today have still not given up on his cause.
Now, clearly there can't be a new trial, but a grant of a new trial simply announces that this was not a fair process. It doesn't exonerate George Stinney, and history will have to record that he was accused of the murder.
Final confessions. George Burke Jr., who had become an alternate suspect by modern-day researchers, was the most likely culprit, who is now deceased. It was said by the family that there had been a last confession. Frierson said that the rumored culprit came from a well-known, prominent white family. A member, or members of that family, had served on the initial coroner's inquest jury, which had recommended that Stinney be prosecuted. Since Stinney's exoneration, George Burke Jr. has been the subject of speculation as a possible suspect for the slayings. Burke Jr. passed away in 1947, aged 26. The Burke family was a scion of society in the exclusive little town. Burke Sr. conducted an initial search for the girls and was the owner of the territory behind Green Hill Baptist Church, where the girls' bodies were found. He was also the foreman of the grand jury that indicted Stinney and has been accused of helping steer the blame off of his son and onto Stinney. According to Sonia Eddie Williamson, a white Alcolu resident investigating the case who became close to Stinney's sisters, George Burke Jr.'s son, Wayne Burke, had told her that his grandmother had told him that his father had picked the girls up in his lumber truck by his grandmother's house on the day of the girls' slayings. In 2017, Wayne Burke denied saying this and said he remained convinced of Stinney's guilt. Stinney's sister had previously recalled that after the two girls had asked about maypop flowers, a lumber truck drove down the road. A tainted legacy. They say it's better to let sleeping dogs lie, but when a miscarriage of justice of the type that George Stinney experienced is carried out, going through it with a magnifying glass should be the approach of the state and society. While George Stinney might have breathed his last at the tender age of 14, the legacy of the crime against him is drenched in his blood, which requires reparations. In January 2022, South Carolina State Representative Caesar McKnight introduced a bill named after Stinney, titled the George Stinney Fund, which would make the state of South Carolina pay $10 million to the families of the wrongfully executed if their conviction is posthumously overturned. A life shattered. At 7:30 a.m. on June 16, 1944, George Junius Stinney Jr. was escorted by 4 guards to the execution chamber. Wearing socks but no shoes, the 14-year-old black boy walked with his Bible tucked under his arm. The guards strapped his slight 5-foot 1-inch frame into the electric chair. His small size made it difficult to affix the electrode to his right leg, and the face mask, which was clearly too large, fell to the floor when the executioner flipped the switch. That day, George Stinney became, and today remains, the youngest person executed in the United States during the 20th century.
Years ago, their families realized that they knew about it and didn't say anything about it. They just let it slide. This particular day, I went to the beauty parlor with my brother Charles, and my sister Amy stayed home with George. George had been taken away. Some men came in the car and took him away. And that was the last. I never saw him again.
How is it possible, even in Jim Crow, South Carolina, for a child to be convicted, sentenced to his end, and executed based on circumstantial evidence in a trial that lasted only a few hours? Through extensive archival research and interviews with Stinney's contemporaries, men and women alive today who still carry distinctive memories of the events that rocked the small town of Alcolu and the entire state, Eli Faber pieces together the chain of events that led to this tragic injustice. The first book to fully explore the events leading to Stinney's passing, The Child in the Electric Chair, offers a compelling narrative with a meticulously researched analysis of the world in which Stinney lived, the era of lynching, segregation, and racist assumptions about Black Americans. Faber explains how a systemically racist system, paired with the personal ambitions of powerful individuals, turned a blind eye to human decency and one of the basic tenets of the American legal system, that individuals are innocent until proven guilty. As society continues to grapple with the legacies of racial injustice, the story of George Stinney remains one that can teach us lessons about our collective past and present. By ably placing the Stinney case into a larger context, Faber reveals how this case is not just a travesty of justice locked in the era of the Jim Crow South, but rather one that continues to resonate in our own time. Pablo Castro, father of 9 and convenience store worker of 14 years in Corpus Christi, Texas, was beaten and knifed 29 times to his demise for $1.25 on the night of July 14, 2004 by John Henry Ramirez, a 20-year-old ex-Marine who had begun using drugs at 12 and was, by the time he happened to spot Castro taking out the garbage that night, at the tail end of a multi-day alcohol, Xanax, and cocaine binge that he was fighting desperately to prolong. This is their story. Breathing his last. Ramirez left Castro breathing his last in a parking lot, fleeing the scene with $1.25 in change. He left for Mexico, where he evaded the law for a few years until agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation captured him near Brownsville, Texas, along the U.S. border. His 2 female accomplices, who had assisted Ramirez in 2 other double robberies the same evening Ramirez took Castro's life, were each arrested the night of the incident and sentenced to lengthy prison terms for their roles in the crime spree. In Ramirez's own words while recalling the night of the incident, he said that he was in the parking lot inside the car, and then he saw his friend struggling with a man who was Pablo Castro. He went out to separate them and Pablo hit him in the mouth, so he got angry. He took out the knife and started to hurt him. He then passed. He said he didn't know how to find another explanation, not even drugs, because at that time he was always high.
And that's what kind of stamped me out. And I realized, I saw how hurt he was. He was bleeding everywhere. And I was like, I knew I went too far with this dude smacking him around. So I go over there, I separate him, I start fighting him. I had stabbed him in the neck. I was in one of the trucks talking on the cell phone. I hear like a scuffle or something. I look and Angie is there.
He had a problem with his anger. He didn't know how to control himself, but he realized how serious it had been. Ramirez then left and he went to sleep at a friend's house. He said he didn't know that Pablo had passed away until the next morning when he saw his own face on the television news, and so he ran away to Mexico. Growing a family. He spent enough time in Mexico to believe he was safe. He married and had a son, Grasshopper. He traveled to Brownsville, Texas with his partner to give birth. He suspected that those who helped him escape gave him away. In 2007, he was arrested, and 15 years later, Texas him. The state sought capital punishment in Ramirez's case, and thus began a years-long process of Ramirez countering Texas's efforts to end his life, while expressing serious doubts as to whether he deserved to live at all. At his 2008 trial, for instance, after his own father took the stand in his defense, Ramirez asked that his attorneys withdraw all additional mitigation witnesses, further requesting that they read the jury the following verse from Psalm 51:3. "For I acknowledge my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me." The jury announced capital punishment for him unanimously. Texas is one of 27 states in the U.S. that still apply capital punishment. It is also one of the most active and has 5 executions scheduled from now until March 2023. In the years that followed, Ramirez's sin was indeed ever before him, recapitulated in court papers and media flares when his legal appeals, at times, succeeded. What he had done had permanently altered a number of lives, his included, and the nature of his sentence painted the balance of his years in shades of guilt and shame. Change of ways. It was while on Condemned Row that Ramirez met Pastor Dana Moore of Corpus Christi's Second Baptist Church and other Second Baptist Church members through the pastor's prison ministry in 2017. he became a member of the church despite being a Messianic Jew. Ramirez was scheduled to be on September 8, 2021. Ramirez, who had found himself transformed by Moore's ministry, requested that Moore be there to pray and lay his hands on him. Texas officials said, however, that Moore could be present during the but could not touch the inmate. Ramirez's case for religious rights ultimately made its way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and as he waited in a holding room the night of his planned 2021 the justices stopped the procedure. The suspension came at the last minute, after the inmate had eaten his final meal. Delayed execution. Castro's family was distraught, incensed. Aaron Castro, one of Pablo's sons, said that if Ramirez wants a priest to bless him before he's sent off, by all means go ahead, and that doesn't affect him one bit. He added that what affects him is why the process continues to get delayed time and time again. He said they always think this is going to be the year. This is the time. There won't be another there won't be another delay, but then something always happens. Aaron said that Ramirez is a disgusting human being and needs to be executed.
Stop trying to get around the situation. There's no way out. You need to be
Things I've done in certain situations that I could have went the other way and it would have totally changed the outcome. You know?
Stop crying. He did the crime, and now it's time for him to get his ultimate sentence. You always think this is going to be the year. This is the time. There won't be another stay of execution. There won't be another delay.
Ramirez's defense team argued that not allowing the prisoner to be in physical contact with his pastor was a violation of the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of worship and prison law. About 6 months later, the court ruled 8-1 in favor of Ramirez and his request to have his pastor's hands on him as he was executed. Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr., writing for the majority, said Ramirez's religious rights were protected by federal law. Texas, he added, should be able to accommodate the inmate's request. If the pastor is allowed to be in the room, we do not see how letting the spiritual advisor stand slightly closer, reach out his arm, and touch a part of the prisoner's body well away from the site of any IV line would meaningfully increase risk. Justice Clarence Thomas, the only dissenter, said Ramirez appeared to be trying to delay his execution. The state of Texas, inelucutable and steady, caught up with Ramirez roughly a year hence on October 5, 2021. Then an employee in the office of Nueces County District Attorney Mark Gonzalez mistakenly filed a request for a new execution date. According to court records, the staffer hadn't consulted with Gonzalez, who opposed capital punishment before doing so. Gonzalez then submitted a request 2 days later to withdraw the warrant. The filed motion to withdraw the warrant was denied. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles voted against commuting the execution. By this time, all possible legal options to save Ramirez from execution had been exhausted. Unforgiving life. Ramirez, who lived in certain respects a hard and unforgiving life, took a hard and unforgiving view of himself. He never attested to a dramatic conversion on the inside, just a spiritual transformation that put him back in the mind of following Christ. With respect to his past, he told a reporter that there were a lot of people that believe there's a God and just don't live right. He added that he just wasn't obeying, he wasn't trying to be good. Once Ramirez's faith reawakened, he began to rely on Moore's spiritual guidance as his inevitable execution date drew nearer and nearer. After the a reporter who met with Dana Moore said Moore sounded very drained. He said Ramirez never really forgave himself for taking Castro's life. He said that about 3 or 4 months ago, John was even toying with the idea of not having him in there or anybody on his side and just letting that be all about Pablo Castro's family. He added that Ramirez was genuinely remorseful. It was almost to the point where it was like he didn't want Moore or anyone else in there because of penance, and just let it be about their family and just whatever they might need to get peace in their lives. On the day of the 5 October 2022, the 38-year-old John Henry Ramirez was transported from the Polunsky unit in Livingston to the Huntsville unit, a 44-mile trek. Once there, he stayed in a holding cell until 6 p.m. when he was walked to the execution chamber. In the chamber, Ramirez said he regretted his heinous act, adding that he hoped his punishment would provide some comfort to Castro's family. Ramirez reflected in his last moments on his inability to deliver comfort or restitution to Castro's family in any other way. He said that he has regret and remorse. He also said that he hoped in some shape or form his execution helped them find closure.
spiritually or in their belief. Not too many people are that far along. A father or somebody, a brother, and I don't expect them to forgive me, you know what I mean? I know it's hard. I wouldn't want to ask them to forgive me, but I just wanted to ask them know that I was sorry. I don't know how I would react if someone killed a close family member. I'm not going to ask them to forgive me because, I think about it, and the warning starts the drug administration, and you start feeling it, and I picture like what I'm going to say to the victim's family, what I'm going to say to my family, and it starts taking an effect. I've done it a couple of times. I picture myself being strapped to that gurney, and every time I do that, oh man, I get like anxious, my heart starts racing. A father or somebody, a brother, and I don't expect them to forgive me, you know what I mean?
To his wife, his friends, his son Grasshopper, Dana and homies, he said he loves them all, adding that just know that he fought a good fight and he was ready to go. It was as if he were morally inarticulate but not insensate. Ramirez could hear Castro's family but couldn't find the right words for them, could feel the love of God but couldn't always reflect it, either in his dealings with others or in his attitude toward himself. 11 witnesses, 5 for the victim and 6 for Ramirez, watched through a window to see the inmate take his last breath.
I never hugged him, I never touched him in my life.
But I had a change of heart. I didn't know John Henry Ramirez has a kid. I don't want that hate cycle to continue.
You look at the hundreds and hundreds of people that are executed here. We are going to the Fifth Circuit to try to get a stay. They don't listen. Then we go to the Supreme Court, try to get a stay. They don't listen, or they might listen.
John Henry Ramirez has not been represented in the manner to which our Constitution guarantees him the right to be represented.
You get sentenced to death in Texas, you're pretty much set that you're gonna die. It's rare that you're gonna get off death row. It could go down to the wire, and it most likely will.
He was executed by lethal injection. The lethal injection took 14 minutes to take effect. Moore laid his hands on Ramirez's chest and prayed to God for John to feel his presence, for John to feel his peace, and for everybody there to feel his peace, because he said that, John first, but it's still everybody else there. It's impacting their lives and affecting them too. John couldn't react to his prayer, nor did the others in the execution chamber. Moore stood waiting by Ramirez's side with his hand resting on him as the man laid before him and passed away. The coroner announced Ramirez no more alive at 6:41 p.m. local time. Moore said that he was just praying for God's presence to be with John as he took him home, as he was going to be with Jesus, so to just bring that comfort. That's all for today, folks. We will see you next time.